Chapter 4. Belgium, a kingdom assembled from the lands of others. Belgium is, perhaps, the most brazen parody of monarchy in the whole of Europe. If the Netherlands were created by the Congress of Vienna as a buffer state in the north, Belgium was created by the selfsame powers as a buffer in the south. And if, in the Netherlands, the usurpation was at least cloaked by the figure of Willem of Orange, who possessed some tie to the country's history, in Belgium the whole affair was conducted with a cynical transparency. Belgium was no kingdom. She possessed no dynasty of her own. She did not even possess a common history. The Flemings and the Walloons had, for centuries, dwelt under the dominion of different states: Spain, Austria, France, the Netherlands. They were united by a single thing alone. They did not wish to be united. And it was precisely this contradiction that the great powers resolved to turn to their own ends. In 1830, Belgium rose in revolt against the United Kingdom of the Netherlands, into which she had been thrust after the fall of Napoleon. A provisional government proclaimed independence. And here the question arose: what was to be done next? A republic? No, the European monarchies could not suffer a republic upon their borders. A king was needed. But the Belgians had no king of their own. They were obliged to import one, like a piece of merchandise, like an article of furniture, like the manager of a manufactory. In this chapter, we shall apply the selfsame criteria as to the other monarchies: blood, indigenat, dynastic continuity, and the lawfulness of the acquisition of power. And the verdict shall prove, perhaps, the most annihilating of all. 4.1. A constitution written for the people, but not by the people. We begin with the foundation. The Belgian Constitution of 1831 is accounted one of the most liberal in the Europe of that age. It proclaimed freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and the independence of the judiciary. The progressives of Europe gave it their applause. But who wrote this constitution? A national congress, an assembly of 200 men. Who were these men? The high bourgeoisie, aristocrats, clergymen, barristers, men of wealth, men of education. Yet not the people. There was no election in the modern sense. The delegates appointed themselves, or were chosen by a narrow circle of others of like wealth. And under whose oversight did this Congress labor? Under the oversight of the great powers: England, France, Prussia, Austria, Russia. They desired no republic. They desired a tractable king. They desired stability upon their borders. And the Constitution was framed in such a fashion as to gratify them. The monarch, the first king of the Belgians, Leopold I, swore an oath to this Constitution. He swore fealty to a law written, not by the people, not by God, not by history, but by a handful of aristocrats and bourgeois under the supervision of foreign diplomats. From the standpoint of classical dynastic law, this alone renders the Belgian monarchy illegitimate. For a king cannot be the servant of a constitution. A king is a sovereign. He stands above the law, because he is the very fount of the law. And if a king swears an oath to a constitution, he acknowledges that his authority proceeds, not from God and not from blood, but from a parliament. This is no monarchy. It is a republic with a president for life, styled a king for the sake of ornament. Yet in the case of Belgium, there is a further layer of absurdity. The constitution to which Leopold I swore his oath was written in the French tongue, the sole official language. The Flemings, who composed the majority of the populace, possessed no voice in this proceeding. Their language was dismissed as a patois. Their culture was accounted second-rate. This linguistic oppression persisted until the 1960s. For 100 years, the Flemings were citizens of the second class in their own country. And the king, who was meant to be the symbol of unity, spoke French. And his heirs, likewise. Only in the 20th century did the Flemish tongue obtain official status. Yet the sediment remained. 4.2. The imported king, Leopold I, a German prince upon an alien throne. The first king of the Belgians, Leopold I, was a German prince of the House of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld, the selfsame house that subsequently bestowed upon Great Britain its German dynasty of Windsor. Leopold was born in 1790 at Coburg, in Thuringia, that is to say, in Germany. He spoke German. He wed German princesses. He was a German. How did he become a king? He was invited. The provisional government of Belgium, having proclaimed its independence in 1830, was in search of a sovereign. They offered the throne to Leopold, who was known for his ties to the British royal family. He was the uncle of Queen Victoria. The great powers signified their assent. And in 1831, Leopold became king. From the standpoint of dynastic law, this is a usurpation in its classic form. He possessed no right whatsoever to the Belgian throne. His blood had no bond with that soil. His forefathers had never governed those people. He was an absolute stranger, placed upon a throne because it was convenient. Yet the most ludicrous detail is this: he spoke no French, and still less any Flemish. He communicated with his ministers in German and in Latin. He learned French only after he had become king, and spoke it with a heavy accent. What sense is there in a king who cannot address his own people in their tongue? What sense is there in a symbol of unity who cannot understand one half of his own subjects? From that day to this, every Belgian king has been confronted with the linguistic problem. Leopold II spoke French with a German accent. Albert I, likewise. Leopold III, likewise. Baudouin, who reigned from 1951 to 1993, did indeed speak both French and Flemish, yet with a marked accent. The present king, Philippe, speaks with a strong accent that betrays his German origin. This is no mere inconvenience. It is the proof that the Belgian monarchy is a foreign institution imposed upon the country. A king who speaks with an accent will never be one of our own. And if he is not one of our own, to what end is he there at all? From the standpoint of dynastic law, this is the purest case of usurpation. A man without a drop of royal blood native to the soil, with no tie to the land, with no knowledge of its tongues, was placed upon a throne by foreign powers that possessed no right to do so. And this man became the king of the Belgians. For point 3, German blood beneath the Belgian flag. As in the case of the Netherlands, the Belgian royal dynasty, Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, is of German extraction. It is the selfsame dynasty that governs in Great Britain, save that there they have rechristened themselves Windsor. In Belgium, they did not rechristen themselves. They had no need to conceal their origin during the World Wars. They simply collaborated with the occupiers. From the standpoint of the principle of indigenat, this is a gross violation. A king must be a native of his country. He must spring from a dynasty that has been bound to that soil for centuries. The Saxe-Coburgs possess no tie whatever to Belgium. They are German interlopers who received a throne as a gift from the great powers. And this fact, the German origin of the dynasty, is one more proof of its illegitimacy. The Belgians fought against Germany in 2 world wars. Their kings, the Saxe-Coburg-Gothas, were Germans by blood. The first of them in the direct line of crisis, Leopold III, capitulated to Hitler in 1940, abandoning his army and his people. The people fought on. The king surrendered. And that king was a German. An irony worthy of the pen of Voltaire. For point 4, Leopold II, the genocidal king and the blood-stained legacy of the Belgian crown. If the foregoing sections have demonstrated the juridical illegitimacy of the Belgian monarchy, we now pass to a dimension that passes beyond the bounds of dynastic law and enters the province of crimes against humanity. Leopold II, the second king of the Belgians, who reigned from 1865 to 1909, was not merely an illegitimate monarch. He was a mass murderer, a man upon whose hands lies the blood of between 10 and 15 million Congolese, a scale comparable to the slaughter of the world wars, yet almost unknown to the wider public beyond the academic sphere. How a Belgian king obtained the Congo as his personal possession. In 1884 to 1885, the European powers assembled at the Berlin Conference to partition Africa. Leopold II, who possessed neither army, nor fleet, nor colonial experience, played a brilliant diplomatic hand. He presented himself as a philanthropist, a crusader against the slave trade, the founder of the International Association of the Congo, a humanitarian organization purportedly created for the enlightenment and advancement of the African. The great powers, wearied by mutual suspicion and desirous of creating a buffer zone in Central Africa, consented to recognize the Congo Free State under the personal sovereignty of Leopold II. Mark well the juridical construction. The Congo became not a Belgian colony, but the private property of the king. Leopold owned a territory the size of Western Europe in the same fashion that a landowner owns his estate. The Belgian parliament had no part in the affair. The Belgian taxpayer paid nothing toward the upkeep of the Congo. All the profit flowed directly into the king's own coffers. The system of forced labor and the rubber terror. In the 1890s, the world was seized by a rubber fever. The automobile industry, the bicycle, electrical cables, all demanded India rubber. The Congo possessed vast reserves of wild rubber. Leopold II established a system of quotas. Every village was obliged to surrender a fixed quantity of rubber. The quotas were deliberately set beyond the possibility of fulfillment. To enforce these quotas, Leopold created the Force Public, a private army of mercenaries and native collaborators. The soldiers were issued cartridges and required to render an account. Each shot fired had to be justified by an enemy slain. To avoid expending cartridges upon game, an offense punishable by death, the soldiers severed the hands of slain Congolese and presented these as proof of combat expenditure. The system soon metastasized. The severing of hands became an independent punishment for villages that had not met their rubber quotas. Children's hands were cut off to punish their parents. Women's hands were cut off to punish their husbands. Baskets of severed hands were piled up at the posts of the Force Public like bookkeepers' ledgers. The scale of the genocide, 10 to 15 million victims. The precise number of the dead is unknown. Leopold destroyed the greater part of the documentation before transferring the Congo to the Belgian state. Yet modern historians, including Adam Hochschild, the author of the indispensable work King Leopold's Ghost, converge upon a figure of between 10 and 15 million souls. This represents roughly 1/2 of the population of the Congo at that period. The causes of mortality: direct killings by the Force Public. Famine, villages compelled to gather rubber instead of growing food. Disease, a weakened populace, the overcrowding of labor camps. Mass executions of hostages. Suicides, Congolese fled en masse into the jungles or drowned themselves in the rivers, unable to endure the terror. The crimes of Leopold II, in their sheer scale, surpass the most appalling instances of genocide known to history. Yet they are scarcely spoken of. Why? Because the victims were black. Because the colonial crimes of Europe have not, to this day, been truly reckoned with. Because the Belgian monarchy, like the British, has invested vast resources in the suppression and whitewashing of its own history. The sale of the Congo to the Belgian state. By the opening of the 20th century, the international scandal had mounted to such a pitch that even the colonial powers began to turn away from Leopold. The British diplomat Roger Casement published an exposé. Mark Twain wrote his pamphlet King Leopold's Soliloquy. Arthur Conan Doyle wrote The Crime of the Congo. Missionaries, journalists, champions of human rights, all demanded an end to the genocide. In 1908, the Belgian parliament, under the pressure of the international community, purchased the Congo from Leopold. The king who, for 30 years, had squeezed rubber and blood from the country received from the Belgian taxpayer an immense compensation, some 50 million francs in gold, the equivalent of hundreds of millions of euros in our own day. He died in 1909, fabulously wealthy, surrounded by honor, without ever having been brought before a tribunal. The modern legacy: statues, silence, and hypocrisy. Throughout Belgium, monuments to Leopold II still stand. In Brussels, in Ostend, in Arlon, in Namur, a bronze criminal, a genocidal king, gazes down upon the descendants of his victims from pedestals paid for by the Belgian taxpayer. Only in 2020, upon the wave of the Black Lives Matter movement, were a few statues dismantled or defaced by activists. Yet the majority remain. The Belgian state has tendered no official apology for the genocide in the Congo. The royal family preserves its silence. The present king, Philippe, did, in 2020, for the first time in the 60 years of Congolese independence, address a letter to the Congolese president in which he expressed his profound regret for the wounds of the colonial past. Yet he did not utter the word apology. He did not acknowledge a genocide. He proposed no reparations. It was a carefully calibrated diplomatic formula, designed to placate critics, yet not to admit guilt. From the standpoint of classical monarchical legitimacy, the crimes of Leopold II admit of no statute of limitations. A crown stained with the blood of 15 million innocents cannot be cleansed by any constitutional reform, by any democratic transition, by any charitable foundation of the present princesses. This is the original sin of the Belgian monarchy, which renders it not merely illegitimate, but criminal in its very essence. A king whose forebear owned men as cattle and slaughtered them in their millions for profit has no right to sit upon a throne. His rightful place is in the dock at The Hague. For point 5, the traitor king, Leopold III and the capitulation of 1940. We turn now to the most disgraceful episode in the history of the Belgian monarchy, the events of May 1940. On the 10th of May, 1940, Nazi Germany invaded Belgium. King Leopold III was the commander-in-chief of the Belgian army. Instead of fighting, Leopold III capitulated on the 28th of May, 1940. He surrendered to the Nazis, without the consent of his own government, without consultation with his allies. His government fled to France, and thereafter to London, where they continued the struggle. But Leopold remained in Belgium. He met with Adolf Hitler at the Berghof. He consented to the meeting. He smiled before the Führer. He voiced no protest against the occupation. After the war, Leopold III sought to return to the throne. Yet the country was rent in two. The Walloons, the French speakers, were against him. They accounted him a traitor. The Flemings, the Dutch speakers, largely supported him, not from affection, but because they saw in him a counterweight to Walloon dominance. In 1950, a referendum was held. 57.7% voted for the return of Leopold. Yet in Wallonia, and especially in Liège and Charleroi, riots erupted. Strikes, clashes with the constabulary. On the 31st of July, 1950, after a mass demonstration in Brussels that was put down by the police, with the loss of 4 lives, Leopold III abdicated in favor of his son Baudouin. 57.68%. Is that a victory? Formally, yes. Yet the margin is so slender as to lie within the statistical error of any serious poll. The king himself had set a minimum threshold of 55%. He received 57.68, almost precisely enough to declare a victory, but not enough to pacify the country. More than this, the referendum was conducted with flagrant juridical irregularities. The Belgian constitution does not permit binding referenda. The government termed the thing a popular consultation, a legal stratagem to circumvent the law. The Flemings voted aye. The Walloons and the Bruxellois voted nay. Instead of uniting the country, the referendum tore it apart. Leopold III himself had, it is clear, expected a greater margin. By some accounts, he had hoped for 60 to 62%. The gap between the expected tally and the tally actually received is one more whisper that his entourage may have overestimated its capacity to command the vote. Soon after the king's return to Belgium, mass strikes and protests broke out. At Grace-Berleur, the police opened fire upon the demonstrators. For perished, Belgium stood upon the verge of civil war. Leopold III was compelled to abdicate in favor of his son Baudouin. What, then, was the purpose of this referendum, if its results were to be disregarded? What purpose was served by the will of the people, if the people poured into the streets to protest against that very will? The answer, perhaps, is a simple one. The referendum was no instrument of democracy, but an instrument for the legitimation of a predetermined decision. When it failed to work, when the people of Wallonia refused to acknowledge its result, the royal family simply ignored it and did what it had intended to do from the outset. Abdication, the transfer of power to the son, and silence. And may it not be that this referendum, with its dubious legality and its regional schism, was one more juridical fiction, designed to lend a semblance of legitimacy to a foreordained outcome? What does this episode reveal? First, it reveals that a monarch may be a traitor. Leopold III broke faith with his country. He surrendered to the enemy. He collaborated with the occupiers, and he sought to return as though nothing had occurred. Second, it reveals that the power of a monarch rests, not upon the love of his people, but upon force. When the Walloons took to the streets to protest against the return of Leopold, the constabulary fired upon them. The soldiery was prepared to crush the rising. Only the threat of civil war compelled Leopold to abdicate. And third, it reveals that the Belgian monarchy is the hostage of intercommunal strife. Fleming and Walloon detest one another. The king endeavors to stand above the fray, yet at every critical juncture, he finds himself upon one side or the other. Leopold III was the king of the Flemings and not of the Walloons, and this split the country asunder. 4.6. A juridical farce, King Baudouin and the abortion law. If the history of Leopold III demonstrates that a monarch may be a traitor, the history of King Baudouin demonstrates that a monarch is a marionette. In 1990, the Belgian parliament enacted a statute liberalizing the law upon abortion. King Baudouin, a deeply devout Catholic, refused to sign it. He opposed abortion upon moral grounds. Yet what was to be done? By the Constitution, no law enters into force until it bears the king's signature. Baudouin would not sign. Parliament could not compel him. Thereupon, the government devised a brilliant solution. It declared the king unable to govern, on vermigen t regeren / incapacit de regner. According to the Constitution, when the king is unable to govern, the government assumes his powers. The government signed the statute in the king's name. 24 hours later, Parliament declared that the king was once again able to govern. the statute entered into force. This is a juridical farce, an absurdity without parallel in the history of the European monarchies. The king was declared unable to govern, not because he was ill or had lost his reason, but because he refused to obey the government. What does this signify? It signifies that the king is no sovereign. He is a pawn. If he does what the government wishes, he is able to govern. If he disobeys, he is declared unable. The power of the king is an illusion. The real power belongs to the government. And this is one more proof that the Belgian monarchy is no monarchy in the classical sense. It is a republic in which the president is styled a king, yet may be dismissed at any moment, simply by being declared unable. For point 7, trafficking in influence, Prince Laurent and corruption within the royal family. It cannot be said that the Belgian royal family is distinguished by any particular moral purity. Scandals touching the employment of royal status for private enrichment have dogged them for decades. The most telling instance is Prince Laurent, the second son of King Albert II and the younger brother of the present king, Philippe. Laurent is the classic, useless prince. He has no official duties. He does not represent the king at ceremonies. He simply draws money from the public purse and lives at his ease. Yet, even this is not enough for him. In 2015, a scandal erupted. Prince Laurent had employed his diplomatic passport and his royal status to secure a lucrative contract with a Congolese company. He promised them his connections in exchange for money. When the affair surfaced, Laurent first denied everything, and thereafter admitted that he had acted imprudently. In 2020, he was once again in the news. It emerged that he had used the funds allotted to the upkeep of the royal family, some €400,000 per annum, to discharge his private debts. Parliament demanded an account. Laurent refused to render one. These are no isolated occurrences. The royal family of Belgium, like their British and Dutch counterparts, live by the maxim, everything is permitted to us. They receive millions from the budget. They pay no taxes upon their private expenditure. They employ their royal status to secure contracts, concessions, and privileges. And when they are caught red-handed, they either deny the charge or shrug their shoulders and murmur, "Well, it simply turned out that way." For point 8, the king of lies, Albert II and his illegitimate daughter, Delphine Boll. If the crimes of Leopold II in the Congo are crimes against humanity, to which no statute of limitations can apply, and morganatic unions are a dynastic sin, the history of Albert II's illegitimate daughter is a personal sin, yet no less devastating to the institution of monarchy for that. It is the tale of how a king, called to be the emblem of honor and dignity, lied for decades to his subjects, to his family, and to his own daughter. An affair concealed from all. At the end of the 1960s, Albert, then still Prince of Liège, the younger brother of King Baudouin, entered into an affair with Baroness Sibylle de Salis-Longchamps, a married woman of the high Belgian aristocracy. The liaison endured for several years. In 1968, Sibylle bore a daughter, who was given the name Delphine. Albert privately acknowledged his paternity, yet never declared it publicly. Sibylle obtained a divorce from her husband. Delphine grew up knowing who her true father was, yet possessing no means to prove it. Albert appeared in her life from time to time, yet always upon terms of the strictest secrecy. In 1993, he became king, upon the death of the childless Baudouin. Delphine remained in the shadows. The Bomb Detonates, a biography of Queen Paula. In 1999, an unauthorized biography of Queen Paula, the wife of Albert, was published. In its pages, the king's illegitimate child was publicly mentioned for the first time. A scandal erupted. Albert, in his Christmas address, uttered a cryptic phrase concerning a crisis in our marriage 30 years ago, yet neither confirmed nor denied the existence of a daughter. Delphine, then 31 years of age, resolved to press for acknowledgement. She had become an artist and had taken the surname Boll, the surname of her legal father, Jacques Boll, who, as it later emerged, knew that he was not her biological father. She gave interviews in which she recounted her story. The royal court preserved an icy silence. A 7-year judicial battle. In 2013, following the abdication of Albert in favor of his son Philippe, Delphine brought suit in a court of law. She demanded a finding of paternity. Albert, now a former king, enjoyed juridical immunity. The court, however, ruled that immunity did not extend to proceedings touching paternity. There began a judicial epic of 7 years' duration. Albert refused to submit to a DNA test. The court imposed fines upon him, 5,000 euros for each day of delay. The fines accumulated, reaching tens of thousands of euros. Albert paid them, yet still declined to take the test. In 2019, when the sum of the fines had become astronomical and the reputational injury irreversible, Albert at last yielded. The DNA test confirmed the fact. He was the father of Delphine. In January of 2020, after 7 years of litigation, Albert publicly acknowledged Delphine as his daughter. She is a princess, but not in the line of succession. In October 2020, the Brussels Court of Appeal ruled that Delphine Boll was entitled to the title of Princess of Belgium and to an equal share in the inheritance of Albert, on a par with his lawful children, Philippe, Astrid, and Laurent. Yet she is not to be included in the line of succession to the throne. This is the typical Belgian compromise. Delphine became a princess. She received the surname de Saxe-Coburg. Her children received the titles of prince and princess. Yet the throne is closed to her. Why? Because she is a bastard, a child born out of wedlock. And dynastic law, even in its Belgian, eviscerated form, does not suffer bastards to approach the throne. What this history tells us of the Belgian monarchy. First, it demonstrates that the king is a liar. Albert II knew of the existence of his daughter for decades. He could have acknowledged her at any moment. He could have done so in 1999, when the scandal broke. He could have done so in 2013, when he stepped down. Instead, he fought for 7 years in the courts, denying the obvious, spending the taxpayers' money upon barristers, being fined for each day of delay, yet refusing to utter the truth. This is not the conduct of a monarch. It is the conduct of a coward. Second, it demonstrates that the monarchy is an institution built upon falsehoods. The royal court for decades denied the very existence of Delphine. The palace press office termed her claims fantasies. The official biographies of the king passed over the affair in silence. The entire machinery of state propaganda labored to conceal the truth. And when the truth was laid bare, no one was held to account. The king simply acknowledged the obvious, and that was all. Third, it demonstrates the presence of double standards. Delphine received the title of princess, but not the right to the throne. Why? Because she is a child born out of wedlock. Yet, from the standpoint of modern law, discrimination upon the ground of birth outside marriage is forbidden. The European Court of Human Rights has repeatedly condemned states for such discrimination. Yet the Belgian monarchy continues to practice it, because otherwise, the entire edifice would crumble. Delphine Boll is a living reminder that the Belgian royal family is no different from any other dysfunctional family, in which a father abandons his illegitimate child and then, for decades, denies her existence. The sole difference is that the taxpayer foots the bill for the falsehood, and pays not only in coin for the upkeep of the palace, the barristers, the fines, but also in faith, placed in an institution that long ago ceased to be worthy of it. For point 9, morganatic marriages and the systematic dilution of the dynasty. The Belgian monarchy, like all its European sisters, has systematically violated the principle of equal marriage. Yet in the case of Belgium, this violation bears a peculiar tinge of hypocrisy, for it has unfolded against a backdrop of official rhetoric about Catholic values and traditional morality that the Belgian kings are so fond of invoking. Leopold III and Lilian Bales, a king weds the daughter of a fisherman. The first resounding scandal broke in 1941. Leopold III, after the capitulation of 1940, secretly married Lilian Bales, the daughter of a fisherman from Ostend. She was a commoner, no aristocrat, no princess. Her father dredged for shrimps in the North Sea. Her mother kept a boarding house. From the standpoint of classical dynastic law, this union was a morganatic marriage in its purest form. Leopold, who already had 3 children by his first, equal marriage to Princess Astrid of Sweden, killed in a motor accident in 1935, married a woman who had no right even to dream of royal station. The marriage was contracted in the strictest secrecy. The Belgian government in exile learned of it only after the fact. Leopold himself fixed the status of Lilian. She received the title Princess de Rethy from the name of one of the royal estates, yet did not become queen. Their children, Prince Alexander, Princess Marie Christine, and Princess Marie Esmeralda, received the titles of Prince and Princess of Belgium, yet were excluded from the line of succession. This precedent carries weight. Leopold III, himself a king, acknowledged the morganatic character of his own marriage. He did not attempt to make Lilian queen. He did not attempt to include their children in the line of succession. He followed dynastic law to the degree that it yet subsisted. Yet his successors went further. They simply ignored the difficulty. Baudouin and Fabiola. The king weds a Spanish aristocrat. Baudouin, the elder son of Leopold III and Astrid, ascended the throne in 1951 upon the abdication of his father. In 1960, he married Fabiola de Mora y Aragon. Who was Fabiola? A Spanish aristocrat, yet not of royal blood. Her father was a marquis, her mother of a noble line. Yet she was no princess. She possessed no royal blood. From the standpoint of classical dynastic law, this marriage was morganatic. Yet Baudouin, unlike his father, did not create a separate title of princess consort for his wife. Fabiola became a queen in the fullest sense. They are hypothetical children. The couple had no surviving issue, having suffered 5 miscarriages, would have been accounted heirs to the throne. This was the first step toward the total abandonment of the principle of equal birth in the Belgian monarchy. Philippe and Mathilde. The present king weds a Belgian aristocrat. The present king, Philippe, married Mathilde de Decazes in 1999. She springs from an ancient Belgian noble line. Her forebears were barons, counts, burgomasters, yet not kings. She possesses no royal blood. From the standpoint of classical dynastic law, this marriage is morganatic. Their 4 children, the heiress to the throne, Elizabeth, Prince Gabriel, Prince Emmanuel, and Princess Eleanor, are the issue of a morganatic union and ought not to inherit the throne. Yet the Belgian monarchy, like all the rest, simply ignored this. Parliament approved the union. King Albert II gave his consent. All concerned affected to see no difficulty. Princess Astrid and Archduke Lorenz, an equal marriage as the exception. The sole equal marriage in the contemporary history of the Belgian dynasty is that of Princess Astrid, the daughter of Albert II, to Archduke Lorenz of Austria-Este. Lorenz is a scion of the imperial house of Habsburg, one of the few princes of royal blood yet remaining in Europe. Their children are lawful heirs from the standpoint of classical law. Yet even this sole Belgian union that may, with some strain, be accounted dynastically admissible is a match with the prince of a non-existent empire. Archduke Lorenz bears the title of a state that vanished from the map of the world more than 100 years ago. He is an imperial and royal highness, without an empire and without a kingdom. It is a brilliant metaphor for the whole modern monarchical system. It is the union of the princess of a real but illegitimate country with the prince of a legitimate but non-existent house. Both of them are political phantoms, whose titles signify no more than theatrical crowns. This is no meeting of 2 worlds, but the tryst of 2 ghosts upon the ruins of history. Yet this exception merely underscores the rule. The remaining members of the dynasty, Prince Laurent, wed to Claire Coombs, the daughter of a British businessman. Princess Delphine, the illegitimate daughter, not in the line of succession, are bound in morganatic unions. Summary table of the marriages of the Belgian dynasty. Monarch/prince spouse extraction status of the union. Leopold III, first, Astrid of Sweden princess equal. Leopold III, second, Lillian Bale's daughter of a fisherman morganatic. Baudouin Fabiola de Mora Spanish aristocrat morganatic. Albert II Paolo Ruffo di Calabria Italian princess equal. Philippe Mathilde de Decazes Belgian aristocrat morganatic. Astrid Lorenz of Austria Este Archduke, Habsburg equal. Laurent Claire Coombs daughter of a British businessman morganatic. The result of the 7 marriages contracted within the royal family over the past 100 years, but 3 are equal. For a morganatic, the present king, Philippe, and his heiress, Elizabeth, are the descendants of a morganatic union. From the standpoint of classical dynastic law, they possess no right to the throne. The Belgian monarchy, created in 1831 as an artificial construct, has, in the 2 centuries that have since elapsed, not only failed to acquire legitimacy, but has methodically demolished such few dynastic principles as it ever possessed. 4.10. The linguistic crisis and symbolic legitimacy. Belgium is a country that has stood upon the verge of dissolution for half a century. In truth, it is 2 countries. The Flemings speak their own tongue, read their own newspapers, watch their own television channels, and vote for their own parties. The Walloons do the same, only in French. They inhabit different economic realities, cherish different historical narratives, and look upon the world from opposing vantage points. Political crises drag on for years. In 2010 to 2011, Belgium lived without a government for 541 days, a world record. And in this predicament, the king is supposed to be a symbol of unity. Yet how can he be a symbol of unity when he is himself a foreigner by origin, speaks with an accent, and belongs to a dynasty imposed upon the country by alien powers? The two communities are bound together by a single thing alone, the king. A German king. A king foisted upon them by the great powers in 1831. A king who speaks with an accent. A king whose forefathers spoke neither French nor Flemish. The official propaganda insists the king is the symbol of national unity. Yet let us put the question, the unity of what? The unity of two peoples who do not wish to dwell together? A unity held together only by the force of the constabulary and the fear of dissolution? The Flemings do not love the king. For them, he is a symbol of Walloon dominance, a relic of the 19th century, when French was the language of the elite and Flemish the language of peasants. The king speaks French with an accent, yet, for a Fleming, it is French nonetheless. The tongue of the oppressor. The Walloons do not love the king either. For them, he is a German princeling, placed upon the throne to gratify England. His dynasty did not defend Belgium in 1940. Leopold III surrendered to Hitler, and Baudouin was declared unable to govern the moment he dared to disobey the government. What sort of symbol of unity is it who may be switched off like a light bulb? The referendum of 1950 laid the schism bare. The Flemings voted for the return of the traitor king. The Walloons voted against it. The king returned, yet he returned as the king of the Flemings. The Walloons poured into the streets. For perished. The king abdicated. 70 years have passed since that day, yet the rift has not healed. It has gone into deep freeze. It has been thrust beneath the carpet. It is not spoken of in official orations, yet it subsists. And the king is no remedy for this rift. He is a part of it. He is the living reminder that the Belgians were once herded together against their will. He is the living emblem of the artificiality of this state. The Flemish nationalists have been demanding independence for decades. They do not love the king. They do not love Wallonia. They wish to leave. The king is the chief obstacle in their path, because, without the king, Belgium might fly apart. And with the king, it cannot. The king will sign the statutes that forbid referenda upon independence. The king will appoint ministers who will suppress separatism. The king will be the symbol of a unity that does not exist. The Walloon socialists do not love the king either. They desire a republic, yet they fear that, without the king, Flanders would secede on the instant. And so they endure the monarchy as the lesser evil. They make use of the king to keep Flanders within the Belgian fold. King Philippe strives to stand above the fray. He travels to Flanders and speaks Dutch, with an accent. He travels to Wallonia and speaks French, also with an accent. He visits factories, schools, hospitals. Yet he will never be one of our own, neither for the Flemings nor for the Walloons. And this gulf between the official narrative, the king is a symbol of unity, and the reality, the king is a stranger to all, saps the legitimacy of the monarchy more potently than any juridical argument could ever do. Whose king is he then? He is no Fleming and no Walloon. He is a foreigner, seated upon a throne because the great powers so resolved in the 19th century. He is a marionette, jerked now by the Flemings, now by the Walloons, now by the European Union. He is no arbiter. He is a hostage. And should the Flemings ever resolve to depart, they will depart not only from the Walloons. They will depart from the German king who was foisted upon them. And the Walloons, left without Flanders, will at last put the question, wherefore do we need a king who cannot speak our tongue without an accent, and whose forefathers betrayed us in 1940? The monarchy presents itself as the Boaz of the nation, the pillar upon which the whole edifice of the state rests. Yet if the pillar is rotted from within, the building will collapse, no matter how many ceremonies are conducted at its base. The king does not unite Belgium. He is the glue that holds the two halves together. Yet the glue has rotted, and sooner or later, it will cease to hold. The question is only, who will be the first to summon the courage to prise it off? 4.11. Juridical conclusion. A monarchy built upon sand and falsehood. Let us now draw the threads together for Belgium. Criterion status elucidation. Dynastic continuity, ex-nihilo, grossly violated. The kingdom was created by the great powers in 1830 to 1831. The territory of Belgium had never before been an independent kingdom possessing its own dynasty. Indigenat, native origin, grossly violated. Leopold I was a German prince, invited to the throne. The House of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha has struck no roots in Belgian soil. Blood, equal birth, systematically violated Lillian Bales, a fisherman's daughter, Fabiola, a Spanish aristocrat, Mathilde, a Belgian countess. All unions with persons not of royal blood. The issue of these unions possess no right to the throne according to classical law. The monarch is not the servant of parliament. Politically violated. The Constitution of 1831 was created by a national congress under the oversight of the great powers. In 1990, King Baudouin was declared unable to govern for 24 hours in order to circumvent his veto. Moral authority of the monarch annihilated. Leopold II, the genocide of 10 to 15 million Congolese. Leopold III, capitulation to the Nazis. Albert II, a decade-long denial of his illegitimate daughter. Prince Laurent, trafficking in influence, the evasion of taxes. What do we behold? The Belgian monarchy is illegitimate upon every count. It was created by foreigners, for foreigners, under the oversight of foreigners. Its kings were German princelings who did not speak the tongue of the country. One of them betrayed the country during a war. Another was declared unable to govern when he dared to disobey the government. Their kinsmen traffic in influence and evade taxes. This monarchy is no national symbol. It is a relic of the 19th century, which subsists only because the Belgians are too busy warring with one another to notice how they are being plundered. For point 1.2, what remains? A void. Belgium could have been a republic. It was a republic after the French Revolution when Napoleon annexed these lands. And nothing terrible came of it. The monarchy of today is an anachronism, subsisting only because no one has troubled to abolish it. The Flemish nationalists want independence, not a republic. The Walloon socialists fear that, without the king, the Flemings would finally secede. The European Union desires stability, not upheaval. Yet when an economic crisis strikes Belgium, and strike it will, when the taxpayers come to understand how many millions are swallowed up by the upkeep of the royal family, then they will put the question. And the answer will be, the Saxe-Coburgs have no right to the throne. They never have. 4.13, the dismantling of the Saxe-Coburgs, a judicial strategy for the citizen of Belgium. The chapter has demonstrated the case. The Belgian monarchy is illegitimate by every conceivable criterion. It was created by foreign powers in 1831. Its first king was a German prince who could not speak the tongues of his subjects. Its second king perpetrated a genocide in the Congo, destroying between 10 and 15 million human beings. Its fourth king capitulated to Hitler. Its sixth king was declared unable to govern for 24 hours in order to circumvent his veto. Its seventh king lied for 7 years in the courts, denying his own paternity. The dynastic marriages were contracted with the daughters of fishermen, with aristocrats lacking royal blood, and with British businesswomen. The principle of equal birth has been violated systematically and with cynicism. Now the question, what is the citizen of Belgium, who no longer wishes to finance this travesty with his taxes, to do with all this? The answer is, bring suit in a court of law. Not to a rally, not to a referendum, to a court. And here is why it can succeed. Why Belgium is more vulnerable than the others. Unlike Great Britain, where the Crown enjoys an almost absolute judicial immunity, and unlike the Netherlands, where the constitutional architecture has been specially constructed so as to preclude any question touching legitimacy, Belgium possesses a unique vulnerability, a judicial precedent that has already punched a breach in the immunity of the monarch. In 2013, Delphine Boll, the illegitimate daughter of King Albert II, brought suit demanding a finding of paternity. Albert, at that time still the reigning king, possessed constitutional immunity. The government argued that a court could not entertain an action against the monarch. Yet the court ruled, immunity extends to the political acts of the king, but not to his private life. A DNA test was ordered. Albert resisted for 7 years, paying fines of €5,000 per day, yet in 2019 he yielded. In 2020, he publicly acknowledged Delphine as his daughter. This is no mere family scandal. It is a juridical bomb. A Belgian court has established, the king may be a defendant in a court of law, if the matter touches, not his constitutional functions, but questions of right. An action touching the legitimacy of the dynasty is no action against a political decision of the king. It is an action for the determination of a juridical fact, the absence of any legal foundation for the occupation of the throne by the House of Saxe-Coburg. This is a question of civil law, not a political question, and the precedent of Delphine Boll opens the door to it. In which court to bring suit? The Civil Court of First Instance of Brussels, Rechtbank van Eerste Aanleg Brussel, / Tribunal de Première Instance de Bruxelles. The Belgian judicial system is constructed upon the French model, in which the civil courts hear disputes touching rights and juridical facts. Suit is brought against the Belgian state, represented by its head, King Philippe. The subject of the action, a declaration of the absence of any legal foundation for the occupation of the throne by the House of Saxe-Coburg. The Brussels Court of Appeal. Upon the inevitable refusal at first instance, an appeal. It was the Brussels Court of Appeal that, in 2020, rendered judgment in favor of Delphine Bolle, recognizing her title of princess. This demonstrates that the Belgian courts of second instance are capable of taking bold decisions against the crown, provided the juridical arguments carry sufficient weight. The European Court of Human Rights. Belgium is a member of the Council of Europe and a signatory to the European Convention on Human Rights. Should the Belgian courts decline to hear the substance of the action, the citizen may have recourse to Strasbourg. The argument is the same as in the case of the Netherlands. The refusal of judicial protection upon the question of the legitimacy of the head of state constitutes a violation of Article 6, the right to a fair trial, and Article 13, the right to an effective remedy, of the Convention. The International Criminal Court. This is a possibility unique to Belgium. The crimes of Leopold II in the Congo, genocide, murder, enslavement, torture, the forcible transfer of populations, fall within the definition of crimes against humanity. Congolese plaintiffs, or their descendants, may bring an action, not against Leopold II personally, he died in 1909, but against the Belgian state as the successor to his personal domain, and against the royal family as the heirs to his fortune. This is no action touching the legitimacy of the monarchy. It is an action for reparation for the crimes committed by the head of that monarchy, and it may be brought independently of anything the Belgian courts may think of it. Who may be a plaintiff? A citizen of Belgium, a taxpayer. Every Belgian surrenders a portion of his income to the budget from which the royal household is financed. The civil list of King Philippe amounts to some 12 million euros per annum. If the dynasty is illegitimate, these disbursements are made in favor of usurpers. This constitutes a direct financial injury. A descendant of the victims of the genocide in the Congo. A Congolese whose forebears suffered under the regime of Leopold II possesses an ideal standing to bring suit. He does not dispute constitutional niceties. He presents a documented fact. My people were annihilated by a man who wore a crown and passed it by inheritance to the present monarch, and the plundered riches have settled in the royal coffers. Delphine Bolle. She has already proved in a court of law that she is the daughter of a king, yet she is excluded from the line of succession. Why? Because she is a child born out of wedlock. The European Court of Human Rights has repeatedly held that discrimination upon the ground of birth outside marriage constitutes a violation of Article 14 of the Convention. Delphine has every ground to bring an action for the recognition of her right to a place in the line of succession, which will inevitably place before the court the question, upon what foundation, precisely, does this entire line of succession rest? A Flemish nationalist organization. The Flemish parties, the N-VA, Vlaams Belang, have been demanding independence for decades. For them, an action touching the illegitimacy of the Belgian monarchy is a means of juridically grounding the right of Flanders to secede from the kingdom. If the king has no right to the throne, then neither does the state of which he is the symbol possess the right to hold the Flemings within its borders. Upon what to build the action, the 5 pillars. The first pillar, Ex-nihilo. Belgium was called into being in 1830 to 1831 by the decision of the Great Powers. Before that date, the territory had never been an independent kingdom. The dynasty did not exist. The Belgian monarchy is a product of the political engineering of the 19th century, and not of historical right. The second pillar, indigenat and blood. Leopold I was a German prince of the House of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld. He was born at Coburg, spoke German, and knew not the tongues of his subjects. His descendants are Germans by blood. The principle of native origin has been grossly and irreversibly violated. The third pillar, the crimes of the crown. Leopold II owned the Congo as his private possession and organized a system of forced labor that led to the death of between 10 and 15 million human beings. These are no mere historical wrongs. They are acts punishable under the criminal law, which, by modern standards, are classified as genocide and crimes against humanity. The plundered riches have settled in the royal coffers and have been inherited by the succeeding monarchs. A crown stained with the blood of 15 million innocents cannot be legitimate under any circumstances whatever. The fourth pillar, morganatic marriages. Leopold III married the fisherman's daughter Lillian Bales and himself acknowledged this union as morganatic, excluding her children from the line of succession. Baudouin married a Spanish aristocrat lacking royal blood. Philippe married a Belgian countess lacking royal blood. Laurent married the daughter of a British businessman. Of the 7 most recent principal marriages, but 3 are equal. The present king, Philippe, and his heiress, Elizabeth, are the descendants of a morganatic union and possess no right to the throne under classical dynastic law. The fifth pillar, the monarch is not a sovereign. In 1990, King Baudouin was declared unable to govern for 24 hours, in order that the government might sign the abortion statute upon which the king had laid a veto upon religious grounds. This is an instance unique in the annals of the world, in which a sovereign was forcibly removed from power, not by reason of illness, but upon political grounds. If a king may be declared unable, it follows that he is no sovereign, but a functionary, liable to be removed at any moment. This is no monarchy. It is a republic masquerading as a monarchy. Why the court will refuse, and why this does not matter. A Belgian court will, in all likelihood, decline to hear the substance of the matter. The arguments will be the same as everywhere else. A political question, a want of standing, the remoteness of the events. Yet it is precisely here that Belgium occupies a special position. The precedent of Delphine Boll has proved that a court may entertain proceedings against a monarch if they pass beyond the bounds of his constitutional functions. The refusal must be reasoned, and that reasoning will itself become the subject of an appeal. Moreover, the refusal of a Belgian court to entertain an action touching the legitimacy of the monarchy against the backdrop of the genocide in the Congo will wear an aspect of peculiar cynicism. A court that found the time and the resources for a 7-year proceeding upon the illegitimate daughter of a king suddenly declares itself incompetent when the question touches 15 million dead? This is a politically toxic posture, which it will be difficult to defend before the Strasbourg court. A practical plan. Step 1. Prepare a statement of claim grounded upon the 5 pillars. Lay particular stress upon the crimes of Leopold II and upon the precedent of Delphine Boll, which opens the door to judicial proceedings against the monarch. Step 2. Lodge the action in the Civil Court of First Instance of Brussels. Join as plaintiffs a Belgian taxpayer, a descendant of the victims of the genocide in the Congo, a Flemish organization. A multiplicity of plaintiffs of differing categories renders the action more difficult to dismiss upon grounds of a want of standing. Step 3. After the anticipated refusal, appeal to the Brussels Court of Appeal, the selfsame court that rendered judgment in favor of Delphine Boll. Argue that the refusal to entertain an action touching the legitimacy of the crown, after that same court entertained an action touching the illegitimate daughter of the king, is arbitrary and violates the principle of equality before the law. Step 4. Simultaneously, lodge an application with the European Court of Human Rights, charging a violation of Article 6 and Article 13 of the Convention. Step 5. For the Congolese plaintiffs, lodge a separate action before the International Criminal Court or before a Belgian civil court, seeking reparation for the crimes committed by Leopold II. Even if every instance refuses, the proceeding itself will serve as a catalyst. The Belgian press, which for decades has suppressed the memory of the genocide in the Congo, will be compelled to write of it in the context of judicial proceedings. The Flemish separatists will obtain a juridical argument to underpin their demand for independence. The Congolese activists will obtain a platform for their demand for reparations. A system that rests upon silence crumbles the moment silence becomes impossible. The purpose of the action is to render silence impossible.